All right, you have to be aware that there's the slap that was heard around the world. A week ago this evening, during the Academy Awards, there was a rather well-known incident now involving a comedian, Chris Rock, who told a joke that was offensive, and Will Smith, since the joke was aimed at his wife, took great offense at it, and then in front of millions upon millions of people watching all over the world, proceeded to the top of the stage, both of them in their formal wear, and slapped them across the face. I have not seen men slap. That was an unusual thing, even when it happened. And it's been the subject of much speculation the rest of the week. You know, the whole idea of provocation, the whole idea of how we respond when something happens, and the danger of how it escalates and the response becomes violent. That slap sort of caught my attention. To slap someone is, in a way, to shame them, to cast shame upon them. It can also be a response to having feeling those emotions of shame and then letting them out. So it sits at the center of everything that's going on. The violence is cruel. It's willfully hurting another person. The slap does not cause physical damage, although it is assault and battery if charges were going to be pressed, which apparently they are not. But the slap causes much more emotional shame than anything else. Vulnerability, looking weak, all of those different things. So much in such a single and noisy slap. And in all this conversation, everyone forgot about the offensive joke which started things. And that made me think of our gospel this week with the woman caught in the act of adultery. As the stage is set for us, Jesus is teaching in Jerusalem. And the scribes and the Pharisees are not really interested in doing capital punishment per se, but they're interested in getting Jesus into trouble. So they bring the woman and bring her into this circle where they're sitting and have her before Jesus, and then says that this woman has been caught in the very act of committing adultery. And our law allows us to stone such women who are caught in adultery. And so he asks Jesus what they should do. See, Jesus knows it's a loaded question. Why does he know that? Because he's Jesus, the Son of God. We should never forget that in these stories. He knows everything that's happening in front of him. He knows that if he says that they can stone her, that this will violate the Roman law, which only the Romans can actually execute capital punishment. They have to have their permission. He would be giving them permission to do something that would be illegal, to get him into trouble. And if he says that they should not stone her, there's no way to parse that with the Mosaic Code, which makes it rather clear the crime of adultery is punishable by death by stoning. Jesus, though, does not fall into the trap. Instead, he exploits the trap. And he begins to scribble on the ground. Now, the ground scribbling is the subject of much scholarly inquiry over the last several centuries. No one knows what he wrote on the ground. John the Evangelist didn't tell us. Maybe he didn't even know himself. Perhaps he was drawing abstract art, sand therapy, something like that. We really don't know. But one of the most popular theories is that Jesus was writing their sins out loud on the ground for them to read, for them to see, so that each would understand where they were coming from. And all we learn is that one by one, beginning with the elders, they all walk away, leaving with Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. You know, I'm struck when I hear the story. Where is the man? Now, I guess you suppose I don't know about these things, but I know enough to know it at least takes two, if not more people, or it's not adultery. And so therefore, where is he? Why is he not there? The very act of adultery means they caught them the way Chris Rock was slapped on the stage at the Academy Awards. Where is he? And you can already see the injustice that is taking place. So Jesus then says to her, "Has anyone condemned you?" And she says, "No, sir." And he says, "I do not, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." I don't want to bypass this death by stoning because it's a prominent feature of the gospel, and I think it's important. Death by stoning, by the way, is blunt force trauma. That's what it is. It's not little pebbles or rocks. It's rather big rocks that are designed to cause grievous and then ultimately mortal injury. So death by stoning is a very messy, violent, painful process. And since this is prescribed for women, I wanted to study how I wanted to find out how the stoning was accomplished in the ancient world. And sometimes men could be stoned, by the way, for various things, including adultery. In each case, a pit is dug, and then the person is put in the pit. If it is a woman, they bring dirt all the way literally up to her neck, where she cannot get out. And if it's a man, it's all the way up to his waist. Then the stoning begins. But if the person is able to wriggle free from their entombment, the stoning has to cease. Well, it's physically impossible for the woman to get through something if she's buried up to her neck. And it apparently is physically possible, but not easy, for the man to extricate himself. But the stoning itself is a violent act. It's the only way you understand it. This purpose is torture. That what it is willfully causing harm to come to a person or not caring about the harm that is happening. And that is what we call cruelty. And the whole point of death by stoning is not to administer justice. It's not to appease God. The cruelty is the point. In 1948, Shirley Jackson wrote a short story called The Lottery and published it in the New Yorker magazine. By the time I was in high school, it was mandatory reading, and I think it's still on curricula all around the country, although now we're passing laws saying nobody can be upset by anything they read, so maybe the lottery is going to go away as well. But it's an incredible story that sneaks up on you. And the story really involves townspeople who have an annual ritual, and that's how you meet them. The story describes a fictional small town which observes an annual tradition known as the lottery, in which a member of the community is selected by chance. In the shocking conclusion, the person selected, a girl, is stoned to death by the townspeople. Many readers demanded an explanation of the situation in the story, and a month after the initial publication, Shirley Jackson responded. Explaining just what I'd hoped the story to say is very difficult. I suppose I hoped by setting a particularly brutal ancient rite in the present and in my own village to shock the story's readers with a graphic dramatization of the pointless violence and general inhumanity in their own lives. One might say that the story about the little fictional town in the lottery, that cruelty is the point. Which brings us right back to the slap, because it's a good touchstone for a much larger question, was how is it that we can continue to be so cruel to each other? You know, Jesus says, whoever is without sin may cast the first stone. And you might remember at the very beginning of the liturgy, we all said out loud, I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned. It's the thing that unites the entire body of Christ as we celebrate the Eucharist anywhere, all over the world. The one thing that we share with each other is that each and every one of us have greatly sinned. That's the one thing that we have in common. And because we have this one thing in common, something logically follows. We can never be the one to cast the first stone. It's easy to say the ancient cultures were primitive in this idea of stoning by death. We've sanitized it now with lethal injection or electric chairs, which really wasn't that nice. The execution, much like every other forms of indifference to human life, the shocking news is breaking as this afternoon of atrocities committed in Ukraine by Soviet soldiers that involved people with their hands tied behind their back, shot through the head, and mass graves of people, including children. The shocking, what was the point of all of this? The point of this is cruelty. It is that ability, it lays bare how savage our ability is to be indifferent to the suffering and pain of others, or to be willfully wishing to cause it. Well, I suppose we can congratulate ourselves if we're not going to commit war crimes and we're not going to stone somebody to death. But don't jump too quickly, because you know that you don't need a rock to stone someone. You and I can do it perfectly well with our words, with our emotions, with our thoughts. You see, that emotional and verbal form of aggression is, it may be passive-aggressive, but it's more aggressive than it is passive. It's not a rock, it's not blunt force trauma in the classic sense of the word, but it's blunt force trauma to the person, and it is meant when it is delivered When Chris Rock told the joke that was offensive about Will Smith's wife, he intended to make fun of her. He said later he was talking about someone else. How long have we heard this story, not the one about the slap? You know, when you're around a grade school, you hear it on a daily basis. Somebody started this, somebody did this. There's always some reason that someone feels justified in doing what they're doing without retreating to the general idea that we've all greatly sinned. Therefore, we can never cast the first stone. You see, it's our penchant for cruelty that is part of our original sin, our penchant for that makes this sin so very difficult to do. So on our playgrounds, on a daily basis, in our classrooms, on a daily basis, in our workplaces, on a daily basis, in our family, on a daily basis, and now with the advent of technology, in cyberspace, on a minute-by-minute basis. It is amazing the amount of verbal and emotional stoning that takes place that has only one thing one can say about it. The point of it is cruelty. And that cannot be the point of Christian disciples who are following Jesus, who carries the cross, because he is most decidedly not cruel. He suffers and dies out of pure passion for each and every one of us. Which brings us to the crucifixion, which will be the climax of the Holy Week celebration. We will read the Passion on Palm Sunday, and then we'll read the Passion according to John, as we always do on Good Friday. We'll hear it twice during Holy Week. The narrative has an inevitable arc. When you pray the Stations of the Cross, you get a smaller version of it. When you get to the later stations, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, Jesus now dies and is taken down from the cross. Every time the story's going to end this way, just like every time Shirley Jackson's story in The Lottery is going to end with the stoning of that innocent girl, the cruelty that is happening. You see, crucifixion is just an even more elaborate form of stoning. Its purpose, of course, is torture, pain. It's not swift, it takes a long time. You would even say blunt force trauma. In the Passion, we'll hear that Jesus is abused, that he's hit, that he's beaten, that he is whipped, that he is spit upon, all types of vulgar things. This is every one of these emotional stones. And you can imagine called every name in the book while all of this is happening. And that's what we do on a regular basis. We may not be violent in the physical sense, but we're not off the hook. We do the very same thing that the soldiers do, and we wound people who are not Jesus and very much unable to deal with the wounds that we administer. And then we pull the blanket back when we discover and say, I didn't mean that. She misunderstood me. I was upset. She started it. All of those excuses to cover up the real reality. The cruelty is the point. The Romans executed Jesus knowing he was an innocent man. That's clear when you hear the Passion. Did it anyway because they were cruel, because they were petty, that they wanted to demonstrate to others that they would be the ones in charge. This desire to have your sense of justice, to have your sense of power, your sense of control is why each one of us engages more often than not in verbal and emotional cruelty, and sometimes as well, physical cruelty. The cruelty is the point. In the latter part of the 19th century, a hymn was composed. I found out this weekend it's actually in our Breaking Bread hymnal. I didn't know that it was in there. The hymn is called There's a Wideness in God's Mercy. I'm going to read the first two verses of that beautiful hymn. There's a wideness in God's mercy, like the wideness of the sea. There's a kindness in his justice, which is more than liberty. There is no place where earth's sorrows are more keenly felt than heaven. There is no place where earth's failings have such gracious judgment given. What a wonderful idea that there's a wideness in God's mercy. Unimaginable, isn't it? I mean, it is unimaginable to us. So many suffer from this idea that God is as wrathful and as violent as we are, and yet he really is not. This wideness in his mercy is our doorway to salvation. This wideness in his mercy is the only way you can explain his death on the cross. Utterly innocent, the only one free from sin beside his mother, standing at the foot of the cross and yet taking upon himself the sin of every human being, including ours. And from the cross, in front of his captors, those who have done such violence to him, he says, Father, forgive them. Because you see, Mercy is the point. Unfortunately, well, there's a wideness in God's mercy, but unfortunately, there's a shocking narrowness in ours. We find Lent allows us to expose ourselves as frequently merciless, as not willing to show mercy, not willing to look the other direction, casting the first stone as if we too are not guilty, if not more, of everything that we see. Lent forces us to look at that and once again depend, as we all should, on the mercy of God. The wideness in God's mercy, contrasted to the narrowness of ours, should make us all sit up in our seats, really think and reflect. How is it I can be a better disciple? How is it that I can be a better person? And become a better person when we literally become more merciful. We say at the beginning of the liturgy, I have greatly sinned. Each and every one of us says this. All we have to remember is that God never casts the first stone. Therefore, neither should we. Mercy is the point.